Ja, då har vi Egetis Therapeutics på scen här och deras IR-chef Karl Hård. Välkommen. Kör igång med dina, så kommer jag tillbaka med lite frågor.
Tack så mycket och god kväll. Good evening. I do apologize that I will speak English. I hope you can understand. The reason is simply that there is such a big interest at the moment in our company, and I know that some people also outside this country are interested to hear what we have to say. So Egetis Therapeutics is a young biotechnology company based here in Stockholm, and we are listed on Nasdaq Stockholm on the main market with the ticker Egetis. Egetis was formed about 5 years ago with the merger of a privately held company, Rare Thyroid Therapeutics, and the former Red Pharma listed on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. Our sole focus is on orphan diseases, so rare diseases, and our main asset is called Emcitate. The active ingredient is tiratricol, and it is developed and has been developed for the treatment of a rare disease affecting boys called MCT8 deficiency, and I will explain the features of this disease and how we are able to treat it. This year has been a very good year for Egetis because we got our first ever drug approval here in Europe in February and have launched Emcitate in the first market in Germany in May this year. We have also had very good interactions with the US Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and recently had a so-called pre-NDA meeting where we discuss what we need to file a marketing application in the US. And we now aim to start the so-called rolling NDA submission in December this year and finalize it early next year, which means that we anticipate a US approval in the third quarter next year. And it's no secret that US is by far the most important market for us, so we are very much looking forward to the coming year. We also have a significant other opportunity for the same asset in another disease called resistance to thyroid hormone beta, RTH beta, which is a different patient population, but a little bit more prevalent than MCT8 deficiency. And we are looking into starting a trial for that indication also in the near future. Our business model is quite simple. We aim to commercialize ourselves in Europe, where we have started, and also in the US. And this is possible in these rare diseases where you don't need a big sales force, but you can do it with a very small targeted team, and mainly actually with so-called medical science liaisons, so scientists or doctors who speak to the treating doctors. In the rest of the world, we have partnerships. We have a licensing agreement with a Japanese company, Fujimoto, in Japan. And recently, this year, we have also signed agreements with, in Turkey, with a company called Erkim, and in the Gulf region with Taiba Rare. And you can see the names of the companies at the bottom of this slide from where we have been able to hire our talented team. And we are very proud, actually, that we have been able to get people to join us from who have a lot of experience in our field. But let me first say a few words about MCT8 deficiency. It's actually quite easy to understand, and I hope I can explain it to you. So the cause of the disease is a mutations, which means that a certain transporter, which is called MCT8, doesn't function. This transporter depicted here in these two parts, either in the blue and red here, this MCT8 transporter is needed to transport thyroid hormone over the blood-brain barrier, so into the brain and the CNS system, and also into neuronal cells and certain other important tissues. So when you have a mutation, which means that the MCT8 protein doesn't function, you get two different types of issues or symptoms. One is so-called hypothyroid state, so too little thyroid hormone in the brain, but at the same time, the body can't sense that it has enough thyroid hormone, so it produces too much. So you have thyrotoxicosis or too much in the rest of the body. And thyroid hormone is very important for brain development. And you can imagine then when you don't have thyroid hormone in the brain in young children and during the development already before birth, you get a lot of different problems. These children or these boys, it's an X-linked disease, so it's mainly affecting boys, are born normal. And they are sent home with actually no issues. And it's only after a few months that the parents start to realize that something is wrong here. They don't turn over, they don't crawl, they usually can't keep their head up. And it's a very severe disease, actually, unfortunately. And you can see that about 1/3 of these children don't reach adulthood. They already die at an earlier age. And the median life expectancy is 35 years. All these children require 24/7 care. The most common cause of death for these children is sudden cardiac death. And this is caused very much by the high level of thyroid hormone in the body, which is causing thyrotoxicosis and cardiovascular issues and some other issues as well. So this is a very busy slide, and I don't want to go into the detail. What I want to show here is that we have a very large data set from different clinical studies in a very rare disease. It's quite unusual because it's very difficult often in rare diseases to find enough patients. But we are working very closely with a team at the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and they have been absolutely amazing in running our trials together, of course, with many other doctors as well. And here you see from the left to the right the different trials which we and different studies which we have, which will form the basis of our US FDA NDA submission, which we start in December and hope to then complete early next year. One of the most important studies here is the second one from the right, which is called the EMC survival study. And what the team in Rotterdam has been able to do is collect mortality data. So looking how long people live when you compare those children who are treated or adults who are treated with our drug and who are not treated. And what this study shows is that you have about a 3 times lower risk of mortality if you are treated with our drug Emcitate compared to those who are not treated. And this is, of course, a very important thing. So what is then the reason for us being able to file our NDA so soon now with the FDA? Well, as I just mentioned, this survival data showing that there is a mortality benefit was first shown last year in September. And earlier this year in February, we got actually all that raw data in-house from the Erasmus team in Rotterdam. And we used to say that we really tortured the data for about 2 months. And then we submitted our analysis to the FDA and asked for the so-called breakthrough therapy designation, which is a very important thing which FDA can give to drugs you are developing, which means that you get much more interaction and help from the FDA in how you should develop it and also the speed by which you can have meetings with the FDA. So when we were granted the breakthrough therapy designation in July, FDA asked us to actually set up a meeting, request a meeting with them. And usually you have a so-called general, what is called a type B meeting, where we just go and discuss, how should you further develop the product. In our case, we thought actually that's maybe not the best thing to do. What if we actually would ask for a so-called pre-NDA meeting and really ask them, what do we need to file to get an approval in the US? And on the 21st of October, we had that meeting face-to-face during the shutdown period in the US. And it was a very successful meeting. And the outcome of that meeting was that FDA granted us a so-called rolling NDA submission, which I mentioned earlier, that we don't need to give all the data in one go. So we can, usually a filing in the US is different modules. And you have, for example, the CMC or the manufacturing module that we can submit already in December. Also non-clinical module, which is everything which is not the clinical data, that we also aim to submit in December, and then finally the clinical data early next year. But the clock only starts to tick when you submit the last piece, and then we aim to ask for a so-called priority review, which should be a no-brainer when you have a breakthrough therapy designation, which means that there is a 6-month review period, and we should then we anticipate an approval in the 3rd quarter next year. About 2 weeks ago also we released data from one of the last, or actually the last studies, which was a so-called ReTriact study. And to our great satisfaction, I would say, we had positive results from this study. It will form part of the total package together with all the other studies which I showed on the previous slide. Now this is just a recap of our commercial strategy. As I said, in Europe and the US, we do it ourselves. Just to calibrate it a little bit, we have about 15 people on the ground in Europe for the commercialization, and we anticipate to have about 25 people at the point of launch in the US. So not a big organization with hundreds of people or so, very targeted. At the moment, we have about 6 people in the US, but 2 weeks ago we only had 3. So we have already doubled it in the last couple of weeks. And that was gated by the results of our last study and also by the feedback from the FDA. So in Europe, just to summarize what we are doing, as I said, we launched in Germany on the 1st of May. And what I haven't mentioned yet, but which was on one of the first slides I showed, is that we have had a very large so-called managed access program or compassionate use program before the drug has been approved all over the world, really, in about 28 different countries. And the majority of these patients have been in Europe. And after launching in Germany on May 1, I can now say, or we told it also now in our Q3 results, that all the patients who were previously in the managed access program have now been converted into commercial patients on drug in Germany. Germany is an outlier, you could say, in Europe, in the sense that when you submit your pricing and reimbursement dossier in Germany, from day one you can actually set the price yourself and start to generate revenue. And then it's a 1-year-long process until you finally agree on the final reimbursed price. In many other countries, like in Sweden, it takes years before you reach that stage. In most countries, like France, Italy, and Spain, we usually think it will take between 1 and 2 years. At the same time, we are also looking into other ways of generating revenue, where you don't have to do a full pricing and reimbursement submission on a national level, but in countries like Poland, Switzerland, and Austria, we are already commercializing Emcitate by discussing either with different regions, hospitals, or insurers. Very importantly for us also, last year, the European Thyroid Association issued guidelines for how MCT8 deficiency should be treated. And again, to our great satisfaction, actually, they recommended that all patients with MCT8 deficiency should be treated with tiratricol, so our drug Emcitate, which is quite unusual to get guidelines before you have an approved treatment. But this is very important for the people discussing the treatment options for MCT8 deficiency patients from our company with doctors who can then point out that these guidelines exist. And importantly also, some of the authors here are not only from Europe, we also have some key opinion leader from the United States behind these guidelines. In the United States, which is our most important market, we aim to or anticipate approval, as I said, in the 3rd quarter next year. But at the moment, we can't speak anything about our compound, our product, but we can speak about the disease. And disease awareness, especially for a rare disease, is very, very important. We also in the US have a so-called expanded access program, which is like a little bit like a clinical trial. You have a trial protocol, and then hospitals can sign up to that. And when they then have patients with the disease, it's much easier for the physicians to include them on the drug instead of having to you do a lot of paperwork for so-called single patient INDs, which we had in place before. And interestingly, it was actually the FDA who demanded or asked us to put in place this expanded access program in the US, because they started to get so many requests for single patient INDs. And at the moment, you see the dots in the lower right here, where there are 15 different hospitals currently who are already signed up to our expanded access program. So with that, I would like to just conclude that we have had a tremendously successful year with the EU approval and launch, and with a good developments for what we need to file our NDA in the US, and also forming very important collaboration and agreements with companies both in Europe and outside. So with that, I'm happy to discuss any aspects you would like. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Karl. I start off with the US. I think what kind of preparations do you need to do for before a possible launch?
Yeah. So what is really important is to basically to increase disease awareness. If you think about which physicians diagnose patients with MCT8 deficiency, it's mainly pediatric neurologists, because the first symptoms are neurological. On the other hand, one of the culprits of the disease is the high thyroid levels in the body, the thyrotoxicosis, so you need also pediatric endocrinologists to understand the disease. So we are present at many different conferences. We have advisory board meetings with physicians, to tell them about it. And then, of course, we also need, different regions, to have presence, in a big country like the US. And that's actually the latest new colleagues I have got are regional medical directors who are very much traveling around meeting consultant pediatric neurologist and pediatric endocrinologist in different hospitals and speaking about the disease. The other important thing is to understand also the pricing and market access dynamics, and to what extent and which payers are willing and what they look at, and what are the things which we need to think about, when we then go in and set the price in the US. Yeah, that's maybe the key thing to.
Yeah, the key things. Are there also patient groups you need to take care of? Or?
Yeah, I mean, so different diseases, of course, have different types of patients group. In this disease, there is a patient group, or there are a couple of different ones, but there is one specifically for MCT8 deficiency, and we have a very good collaboration with them. For example, we were sponsoring a TV program about the disease. Of course, not anything about our treatment in the US, and there we had our head of or president of the US. So Egetis president, not the president of the US, and then also a member or a mother from this patient group. Also, when we went to the pre-NDA meeting and talked with the FDA, we actually invited also a mother who had a child with the disease to explain how it is to live with a child with this disease, in reality, so to make it more real. And she was, is also instrumental and has her network of contacts in the US.
I understand. Also about this breakthrough designation that you got granted from the FDA. How does that influence, the timeline for you?
I mean, for us, it was very important, as I tried to explain, that when we got the breakthrough therapy designation, that allowed us to ask to have a so-called pre-NDA meeting with the FDA and actually discuss exactly what we needed to file in our drug for approval in the US. It's more difficult if you don't have that BTD designation, because then you have to go, have longer timelines, and you don't have the same access to the agency. It's also actually a very good sign. You understand of how FDA thinks when they give a BTD, especially when they give it that late during the drug development. Usually they give it much earlier based on phase 1 data or early phase 2, but we got it when we were in the latest phase, in the phase 3. Because what it actually then means is that FDA then thinks that the drug actually really has a meaningful clinical benefit at a very late stage. So then it becomes much more difficult for them to not approve it. And they already said that we like you.
Of course. I think, could you comment a little bit about the first launch here in Germany? Has it followed your expectations, so to say? Or?
Yeah, the first thing we wanted to do in Germany was, of course, to convert the patients who were already in our managed access program. And at our Q1 results in August, Q2 results in August, we had converted almost all. There was actually just one patient who had a more packs at home than the others who hadn't been converted. Now we have converted all of them, and we have also identified new patients. Some of them have already started to be on our commercial products, and others we are still in this discussion phase. But we have also added a couple of people on the ground in Germany so that we have more voice with the physicians. But so far so good.
Yeah, okay. When it comes to Europe, I mean, seems to be a varying reimbursement in the European Union. You have an initial reaction in France, for instance, and you seem to solve that, right?
That's correct. I mean, Europe is a very difficult place for pharmaceutical companies right now, and especially for smaller companies. Because if you think about it, you get the European approval for all 27 member states and a few other countries. But then you have to go into every single country and discuss different pricing and reimbursement. And of course, a smaller company like us can't have people on the ground in all these countries. We do it via consultant and so on. But coming back to France, yes, we had an initial denial of reimbursement in France in end of September. But one of the key points the French health authority, HAS, had was the lack of placebo-controlled data. Now with the last trial, which I mentioned, the ReTRIACt trial, that was a placebo-controlled trial. So with that data, which we are now preparing, since it's still very raw, we will go back to the agency, resubmit, and also with the new survival data we have, we will add that to the package as well. I mean, this is very common, especially for rare diseases, that you have many iterations, and that's why we guided the market when we submitted initially in France in April this year, end of April, that we expect it to take between 1 and 2 years, depending on, of course, on the number of iterations we need to have.
But if you follow your company, you will see product launches going forward when you get approval for the reimbursement, or what should we expect?
Yes, no, definitely. I mean, absolutely, and I mean, but then it also depends on the different countries. In some countries we might not do a full national reimbursement process. We do it in the so-called alternative fundings. Maybe I should take the chance to comment a little bit on those who have followed us, about the enormous share price changes the last today and also before, but especially today. I mean, this was based on a very negative and factually also quite incorrect report from Pareto last night, where their sell-side analyst, our analysts, took down the target recommendation from 6 kronor to 160, and also from a hold to a sell. We have been speaking to all other analysts, to investors, and also to Pareto today to point out what the errors were. I mean, some had to do with the situation, for example, in Germany, where we have converted all patients. They said that we have converted most patients. Others was that we didn't give sales. We definitely gave sales numbers in our Q3 report. But then they also suggested that they had talked to some other key opinion leaders about an alternative treatment, which is so-called using a PTU, propylthiouracil, together with thyroxine, LT4. However, I mean, we know most of the key opinion leaders in the world, and we don't know anybody who would recommend the use of this. I mean, just a couple of points there. PTU has a black box warning. It shouldn't be used long-term, especially not in children. There is a publication from last year when you use this treatment in patients, you actually don't lower the thyrotoxicosis. You still have a high thyroid hormone pressure in the body. You don't see the lowering of the cardiovascular issues. You also, very importantly, don't see any weight gain in this. And one of the biggest issues in this disease is the low weight, which we can affect with MCT8 treatment. So all in all, I think it was something very unfortunate and with many incorrect things which we have tried to correct.
It's difficult now when we don't have Pareto on stage to defend themselves, but I've seen the news flow and we'll probably need them here to discuss that. Time flies, we don't have that much time left. Thank you very much, Karl, for coming here.
Thank you.
Yeah.